Africanews continues its discussions on the ICC, the International Criminal Court, whose critics in Africa continues to grow. Today, the court holds the 15th session of the Assembly of State Parties of the Rome Statute at The Hague. Provided by the Rome Statute, which is the basis of the ICC, the Assembly of the State Parties is the principal administrator and legislative body of the ICC. It decides on various items such as the adoption of the normative text and of the budget, election of judges, prosecutor and deputy prosecutor.
Time when most African countries say they have been targeted by the International Criminal Court. It all began with Burundi, which announced its intention to withdraw from the Rome Statute, followed by South Africa. Earlier this month, Gambia became the third African country to give a formal notice to the United Nations of a pullout that will take effect from the 10th of November 2017. Kenya, Namibia and even Uganda are among other African countries that have indicated they too are considering pulling out of the Rome Statute. But what exactly do these withdrawals mean to international criminal justice in Africa? We are now joined by a lead defense counsel of the International Criminal Court at The Hague in Netherlands, Chief Charles Taku. Well, it's a great pleasure for us to have you in our program today. Well, can we say the ICC is selective in the handling of the cases?
Now, discrimination or selectivity, as the case may be, or non-discrimination is a treaty obligation. In all major treaties in the world, there is a provision on non-discrimination. It's a treaty obligation. And when it was now Africa brought up that accusation of exclusive target in Africa or discrimination, the ICC would have taken serious note and would have at least moved early enough to dialogue with Africa to see how this issue could be resolved. Take note, Africa and reasonable practitioner of international law respect the original objectives of the Rome Statute, which we all support.
Well, Chief Taku, critics argue that African countries were among the very early supporters of the International Criminal Court. Are they now complaining because the law is after them?
Now, if they invited the ICC and are complaining, they are still complaining, it means the ICC came in and did something which is not right. I've argued, and many people have argued that Africans, for example, do not make arms. And the ICC, if they came into African situation, even if invited, and conducted thorough investigations, they will go against arms manufacturers and arms distributors, which are used to perpetrate this conflict. Africans saw in the ICC the only opportunity for Africa in equality with the rest of the nations of the world to stand and say never again. And I say so because from the time of the United Nations and before the independent Africa, Africa was not a subject of international law. It was only the ICC that came up, and Africans saw that for once, joining the ICC massively, the crimes that were perpetrated against Africa, like slave trade, colonialism, and exploitation of Africa, were going to stop for good. And therefore, all this crime are all found on the African continent, and they could be fished out and prosecuted by the court, not necessarily Africans.
Well, a last question, Chief Taku. Yet again, the ICC Assembly of Parties will be meeting and critics are calling for reforms. Well, you have been with the court for some time now. What sort of reforms would you like to see?
These countries did not just get up one day and say, well, we're withdrawing. They complained and complained, but there was nobody there to listen. This Assembly of States will put in place a mechanism, an early warning mechanism, to look at the complaints of state parties, whether they are founded or not, and to also give a pride of place to dialogue in order to reconcile the NGOs and the civil society and state parties. Because the so-called civil society, they play a major role, support role to the ICC. But then there's a problem here. The civil societies in Africa become politicized. Their source of finances come from special interests in the West. And many regimes in Africa see them as people who are competing for power, trying to destabilize the regimes. Whether that is true or false is another thing. In any case, they should also be able to help African countries to be able to prosecute the crimes, to domesticate the Rome Treaty and prosecute the crimes.
That was Chief Charles Taku, a lead defense counsel at the ICC.
Qui revenait là, grosso modo, sur le rapport entre l'Afrique et cette organisation qui est très
He was talking to us about the